All right, folks, I might get started as we have a very full program. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Philip Archer and I'm the chair of the CEO Satellite Club at Rotary Southbank. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you here for this very special meeting where we have our Federal Treasurer, the Honourable Josh Frydenberg, presenting on an economic update post-COVID. Josh will be more formally introduced by Professor Graham Samuel shortly. But it's my pleasure to welcome all of our participants, our leadership, and Rotarians and friends. Thank you for being with us this morning. What a great morning in Melbourne. What a lovely day in Melbourne yesterday. And I've got to tell you, we've got people coming in from New Zealand, from all over Australia, and in fact, one from Timor-Leste. So Josh, you have a very good audience. I'm expecting over 250 people today. We are starting a minute or so early to get the main show on the road. So without any further from me, as it's nearly 7:30, Graham Samuel, may I ask you to take over and introduce the speaker, please? Graham, you're on mute. Graham, you're on mute.
Right, now it's not.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Treasurer, I looked at your Wikipedia entry and discovered that it was some 20-odd pages. I didn't think that was appropriate, but just want to give a little bit of history for those that might have forgotten what's happened over the past year and a bit. In March 2020, supposedly reputable economists were confidently predicting that our unemployment rate would surge to 20%, and that Australia was submerging into a depression, and they use those words. Recovery from this Armageddon would take at least 5 and up to 10 years. Well, as it happened, the doomsayers had to satisfy their thirst for doomsday with a technical recession caused significantly by Victoria's disastrous lockdown, an unemployment peak rate of 7.4%, but of course they said that wasn't real. By all sorts of mathematical machinations, it was really over 20%. And a recovery in a matter of months, but of course they said that will be short-lived. And then we all had the experts in relation to JobKeeper urging government to abandon it as reckless, or alternatively to expand it because it was inadequate and cruel. And many in business were predicting that in September 2020, business would fall off a cliff when JobKeeper ceased. And if it didn't, it would when the markets realised the government had loaded the economy with $1 trillion gross debt burden, which our great-grandchildren would be heavily taxed to repay. The concept of net debt seemed to have eluded them. Through all this, the Treasurer had to battle the doomsayers, our expert commentators in the media, his political opponents, and all and sundry. But look at what he and the government have achieved. Unemployment at the lowest rate in over a decade, a booming property market, and the economy still growing in spite of forced business shutdowns in our 2 largest states for months on end. And the world rating agencies have maintained their AAA credit rating on the Australian economy, with a recent upgrade from negative to stable, praising, and I quote, the government's swift and decisive fiscal and health response and its strong economic recovery. I like to use the C word describing the hallmarks of true leadership, with the 3 C words: conviction, courage of your convictions, and ability to communicate. No one would doubt Josh Frydenberg's AAA rating on each of these measures. And on a personal level, he's a thoroughly decent individual with unblemished integrity. Welcome, Treasurer, to our gathering of nearly 300 participants. We look forward to hearing from you.
Well, thank you very much, Graham, for that very warm introduction. My only regret is that my mother's not here to hear all of that, because she'd be the only one who believes it all. But it was very generous indeed, and thanks for your friendship and for your leadership as well. Can I start by acknowledging the Rotary International Director, Jessie Harmon, the District Governor of District 9800, Dale Hoy, of course, the Chair of Rotary, CEO Satellite Club, Philip Archer, to you, Graham, to my good friend Patrick McGorry, as well as Rotarians and friends who are on the call, and there are many familiar faces. I'm very proud of Rotary in my local electorate of Kooyong, as well as Rotarians right across the country, more than 1,000 clubs, 25,000 members. And from its formation, humble beginnings under Paul Harris back in 1905, it's gone on to make such a significant contribution to our global community and to our local communities. The work that Rotarians do in poverty alleviation, the work that you do in improving water quality and various projects, the work that you do in child health, and the list goes on. I was looking at some of the data recently about polio. Back in the 1980s, there were 350,000 plus cases of polio around the world, and Rotarians have made this a major focus, having raised over $2 billion for the eradication of polio. And only recently, there was just 200 wild polio cases around the world. It's just a very practical example of the wonderful work that you do as Rotarians, as well as enjoying, of course, that fellowship among you. So thank you for the opportunity to be with you today. As Graham was alluding to, we have been living through one of the more tumultuous periods in Australia's history. I never thought I'd be standing or sitting before you this morning as a treasurer facing a once-in-a-century pandemic and the biggest economic shock since the Great Depression. Indeed, early last year, even after the terrible bushfires and ongoing drought, I was looking forward to delivering the first budget surplus in 12 years, yet I've delivered, obviously, the biggest deficit that we have seen in some time. But that has been a function of events that have been beyond our control. So what I thought today I would do is talk a bit about where we've come from, where we are, and where I hope we're going as an economy and, of course, as a country. In terms of where we were, it was a major shock to learn of the spread of the virus early last year. And you will all remember those images of our fellow Australians lining up in their hundreds of thousands outside Centrelink in images that were, for many, reminiscent of scenes of the Great Depression. People weren't just worried about losing their jobs. People were worried about losing their homes and losing their life savings. And there was a sense of fear that had permeated the entire community. And we responded with that program called JobKeeper, the largest economic support program any Australian government has ever undertaken. And that immediately put a floor under the economy. I remember speaking to John Howard, someone that I greatly respect and someone who I had the opportunity to work for previously. I was speaking to him just prior to announcing the JobKeeper payment. I said to him, John, you know, as a Liberal, I never thought I'd be announcing a economy-wide wage subsidy. And, you know, I was obviously balancing up, you know, lots of thoughts in my mind as I was preparing that policy with the Prime Minister. And I asked him, you know, for his reflections. And John Howard, to his credit, said to me, he said, Josh, at times of national crises, there are no ideological constraints. And that is very much been a guiding principle for us to do what has been required to steady the ship and to prime the economy for a very strong recovery. Back in March, prior to announcing JobKeeper, we saw consumer and business confidence fall to their lowest levels on record. We saw the Australian Stock Exchange have its single biggest daily fall on record. I had Treasury come to me and say that unemployment could reach as high as 15%. That's more than 2 million people unemployed. And that GDP could fall and the economy contract between 10 and 12% in the June quarter last year. That would be the highest on record. And they even had a worst case scenario where if further restrictions were put in place, the economy could contract by around 24%. That would be just catastrophic in terms of the overall economy. So it was with that in mind that we responded with JobKeeper, a $30 billion program called the Cash Flow Boost, $750 payments to pensioners, to carers, to veterans, to others on income support. We doubled the safety net with the JobSeeker coronavirus supplement, and we essentially ensured that people, families, and businesses could hibernate until the restrictions were eased. A good example of all the different things that we did is illustrated by a conversation I had with a small business owner, a lady who ran a homeware and cafe on Chapel Street in Melbourne. And she had set up a business not long and not that shortly before the COVID pandemic hit. And when it hit, her 8 staff were obviously straight away in jeopardy, and she started to lay off staff. She was worried that not only would she have to close her business permanently, but that she would actually lose her house because she had taken a larger mortgage in order to support her business. Because of JobKeeper, she was able to bring that staff member back on. Because of the cash flow boost, she was able to meet her electricity and water and other bills. Because of a program we put in place with the states to provide rental relief for tenants, she was able to get a relief on her rent. And because of an arrangement that we reached with the banks to provide a relief in terms of debt repayment, she was able to get a time for which she would not have to meet her interest and principal repayments on her loans. Effectively, that hibernated her business, so to the point that now she is bigger than she was going into the pandemic, and she now has more staff than she had going into the pandemic. That is what we decided to do, to have a full court press with a range of economic initiatives to support the economy. Now, that saw our economy bounce back very strongly. In the back half of last year, we had the strongest economic growth that Australia has seen over 50 years. Our unemployment continued to come down. It peaked at around 7.4%, and it started to come down below 5%. So before the Delta variant hit, our economy had actually become bigger and more people were employed than before the pandemic began. And we did that ahead of any other advanced economy in the world, which was quite a signature achievement for everyone. And then the Delta variant hit. And with the Delta variant, we've obviously seen our 2 largest states in lockdown, Victoria and New South Wales. And, you know, being a proud Victorian, as many people are on this call, you know, it's not a title that you want as a city to be the longest lockdown city in the world, more than 260 days in lockdown, and tragically more than 220 days out of the classroom for our students. That's more than a full academic year lost in the classroom. And the ramifications of all of that are going to be quite long lasting and quite significant. But the good news is that our economy now, with restrictions easing, is primed for a very strong recovery. We know that consumer confidence last week had its 6th straight week of increase. We know that business confidence is up as well. We know that job ads are higher than they were going into the pandemic. We know, as Graham referred to, our AAA credit rating has been reaffirmed and our outlook upgraded. And we also know that there is $330 billion that's been accumulated on household and business balance sheets that was not there at the start of the pandemic. That is money that people have saved as they've been subject to these health restrictions and have not been able to travel or move more freely and spend as they otherwise would. That money will be spent, and that money will generate jobs and generate stronger economic growth as well. So the Reserve Bank of Australia, the IMF, the OECD, the government are all optimistic about the future economic prospects of the country. The other thing I would add here is that monetary policy has been very accommodative through this crisis, with the cash rate at 10 basis points, the lowest on record. And from the Governor of the Reserve Bank, it's his expectation, obviously, that the cash rate will stay low for some time. So you've got monetary policy and fiscal policy working together. Now, finally, to talk a little bit about where I think we're going as a country and, of course, as an economy. As I said, I'm optimistic, but there will be some changes as a result of COVID that I do think become structural and permanent. One of them is the rapid uptake across the economy of new technologies. The fact that we're now meeting on a Zoom as opposed to a physical presence has been imposed on us. But I think going forward, there'll be a lot more meetings on Zoom. There will be people who will not travel interstate for a board meeting or a committee meeting who will prefer to engage online. More people are shopping online, and that will obviously be a challenge for the bricks and mortar retail sector as more people invest in the distribution centres and more people shop online. And I think obviously people are working from home. Now, some will obviously go back to the city, and that's going to be important, but there will be more people working online, I think, permanently going forward, or working from home. With the McKinsey doing a study which thinks up to 25% of people in professional services will be working from home in some form going forward. So I think there's going to be a big change around the speed and the permanency of the uptake of new technology. I think another big change is going to be the empowerment of our regions. We're already starting to see a lot more people move from the cities to the regions. Why? Where you get a bigger house and a bigger land than you may do in the city, but you also get a lifestyle choice. And I think this pandemic has forced a lot of people to reassess their lifestyle choice. And if you can be digitally enabled to work from home, then that is maybe something you can do and at the same time live out of the city or the urban area. So I think we're going to see more people move to the regions, and we're already starting to see that reflected in property prices in our regions. I think another permanent change is going to be around our population. We've obviously closed our borders. That has meant that population growth is now the lowest in more than a century. More people left the country last year than came to it. That's the first time that has happened in decades. And so we're expecting our population size to be smaller than we otherwise thought. And so we're expecting Australia to reach 38 million people by 2060. This is 6 years later than we initially thought. And that's because of the permanent consequences of what happened through COVID with the closure of our borders. With respect to other areas of focus for us, obviously it's tax reform, it's skills reform, it's infrastructure, it's cutting red tape, all of those things that I think will help drive a stronger economy and a more productive one going forward. Finally, the topic du jour at the moment is obviously climate change and the world moving to net zero by 2050. So I thought I'd share a few thoughts with you. It's important that when people look at this issue, they understand it's not a binary choice. It's not a zero-sum game between lower emissions and a stronger economy. We have reduced our emissions by more than 20% since 2005. In the same time, our economy is more than 40% larger since 2005, and more than 3 million people are in work that were not in work back in 2005. So I'm confident that our economy can continue to adapt and capitalise on the opportunities that come with a lower emissions future. But that means having a plan, and a plan that can actually deal with those issues in a very structured and considered way. And we've heavily invested in renewables over recent years, to the point that our emissions coming down faster than in the United States, in Canada, in New Zealand, and other comparable countries. So I think hopefully, Philip, that gives you a sense of what's on my plate. I think it's been a remarkable journey the last 2 years. Australians have suffered an enormous amount, but at the same time, we can be very proud of what we've done as a community. We've had a strong recovery, as Graham was alluded to. I'm confident about where the economy is going into the future. There will be some permanent changes, but overall, you wouldn't want to be in any other country but Australia. Thank you, Graham.
Thanks, Treasurer. Very interesting. And we've got time, I think, for some questions. By the way, did you just do an interview with Frank Kelly on Radio National?
I did just before I joined you.
Yeah, and I've just got the news that you've driven her out of Radio National after 17 years. She decided to retire from it. So it must have been a very, very impactful interview.
Getting up at 3:30 in the morning, Graham, I think for 17 years takes its toll on anyone. Yeah. But I did say in the interview that her dulcet tones had been heard by millions of Australians around the kitchen table, and she'd been an outstanding broadcaster and journalist.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, we've got a whole range of questions here that we've got from from very interested members. This is before you were speaking, so I'll give some of these to you. This one comes from Chris Stillwell, who's the chairman of the Stillwell Motor Group, and he says this: I see substantial supply chain disruption, inventory shortages across many sectors, labour shortages, particularly for skilled tradespeople, unions pressing for wage increases, really strong property sector, both commercial and residential, and pent-up consumer demand, with New South Wales and Victoria coming out of extended lockdown. Hurrah, hurrah. And then he says, in my business experience, these are all precursors to inflation and substantial interest rate increases. I'm thinking consumer loan mortgage rates around the 10s within 2 years. But the RBA, the media and others are saying nothing to see here. So Chris asked the question, what am I missing?
In terms of interest rates, that is obviously going to be a decision, Graham, of the Reserve Bank. They're in charge of monetary policy and not me. I'm in charge of fiscal policy. In terms of interest rates, well, the market has been pricing in some changes in the period ahead, as you know. But at the same time, the inflation rate has been below that band of 2 to 3%. And it is a goal of the RBA to get inflation up and to get wages up. And they see lower interest as a means of doing that. You're right about housing prices. Housing prices have been particularly strong, and that is not an Australian phenomenon. That is a global phenomenon, and that is off the back of what we've seen in interest rates largely. I mean, obviously stable labour markets contribute to that, but it's really been driven by lower interest rates. As you know, I've supported what APRA has announced recently with changes around the serviceability buffer and some little tightening of some of those levers. Again, that's something that they're doing off their own bat to maybe take some of the heat out of the market with respect to people who are highly leveraged. Again, I think targeted, considered actions today may mean that less is required tomorrow.
I think it's worth noting, Treasurer, for those that are listening, that the actions taken by APRA with the buffer on mortgage lending seems to be doing the trick that you were seeking to achieve, which seems to endorse then the decision that you made a while back to take the issue of responsible lending out of the hand of ASIC and just concentrate it in APRA. You might want to.
Well, in terms of responsible lending, we're still trying to get that through the Parliament, and that is badly named because people think of that title and they think, oh well, what's wrong with that? But it's actually a layer of red tape that makes it harder for people to get access to finance. It increases the costs and to the bank and therefore the cost to the consumer. I'm not sure why you need to show your Uber Eats slips or your Netflix receipts in order to get a home loan. So there is a level of detail that's required there that I don't think is necessarily proportionate to what is necessarily good public policy.
I've got a question on this old hoary chestnut of clawing back on JobKeeper. The questioner really has asked this, that the significant costs of the country will result in support of some future government projects or needy people in the community may come under tighter constraints. That's with the high debt. The question is, what plans does the federal government or the tax office have for clawing back some JobKeeper windfalls that some companies have taken advantage of when they perhaps really did not need it? The questioner, David Langren, has asked, I note this week some private schools were supplied significant support that bolstered profits despite not reducing student fees.
Look, I'm really glad you asked me that question because it allows me to engage in a bit of myth busting here. The first thing to say is this was an economy saving program. As you alluded to, Graham, and as I spoke about, the unemployment level was feared to go as high as 15%. That would be a scarring of the labour market that would have had long-term ramifications. We've been able to get the unemployment rate back to where it was pre-pandemic in just over a year. In the 1980s and the 1990s recessions, it took respectively 8 and 10 years to do that. So it's a big, big change. And what that actually means is that I think our labour market will be stronger for longer. Now, we announced JobKeeper based on an anticipated decline in turnover because we needed to give confidence and certainty to the businesses who feared that health restrictions could be in place for a long period of time, and therefore they would have sacked their workers and in many cases never rehired them. And so that was the advice of Treasury, and I think it was the right advice. And in their words, it would have muted the recovery if we actually had a clawback mechanism, because many of those businesses wouldn't have taken the support and therefore many jobs would have been lost. And I put it to you, just because a business's decline was down by 20%, not 30%, doesn't mean that it didn't incur significant damage. Doesn't mean that, but for JobKeeper, it could have been higher, 40 or 50%. So it's actually enabled businesses to keep their doors open, to modify their practices so that they could continue to provide the services in other ways. And it has been a very big part of our recovery. So I just say, yes, the program had a very large bill, but at the same time, if we had not put JobKeeper in place, the unemployment rate would be significantly higher. The RBA thinks it saved around 700,000 jobs. And having more people unemployed for longer would have been a huge cost to the taxpayer, with, of course, the social consequences that come with that as well.
All right. The next question comes from Amanda Went. What's the federal government plan for those hermit states that balk at following the consensus on reopening?
Well, we're obviously putting as much pressure as we can for the country to reopen consistent with the national plan agreed at National Cabinet. When you get these vaccination rates, which are now among the highest in the world, in the ACT, they've got a first dose rate of 98%. In New South Wales, I think it's around 93%. In Victoria, it's approaching 90%. They're incredibly high vaccination rates. And that is our best form of defence. So it is important that once you get to 70 and 80%, restrictions ease, the economy reopens, and kids get back at school, border closures are lifted, and we can move much more freely across our country. So we're just continuing to make the case, an evidence-based case, that if you ease restrictions, you strengthen the economy, and it's safe to ease restrictions once you get those vaccination targets hit.
And I think the evidence of the success of that approach is what's happening in Victoria at the moment, following on New South Wales example. And there's almost a race by each of them to perhaps open up a bit more quickly and to meet the competition of the two states. So that seems to be working. And amazingly, our Queensland Premier has decided to open up on December the 17th. So that's another move in the right direction.
Yeah.
I could ask you what you do with Mark McGowan in the West, but I suppose you just throw your hands up and say, mission impossible. All right, the next question. The gross debt, I mentioned this before, the gross debt is nearing $1 trillion, although that seems to omit reference to the net debt. What Australian industry investment strategies does the government have, e.g. technology-based companies that focus on developing and selling Australian automated driving technologies and connectedness IP, given this will fulfil climate change obligations by Vision Zero? I'm just going to expand on that a little bit, Treasurer, in this sense. It's worth, if you wouldn't mind, just commenting upon our net debt position relative to other countries in the OECD, because that's equally important. Perhaps just to explain the difference between gross debt and net debt. And then there is this whole question about the extent to which, and you spoke about structural changes in the economy and new technologies, the extent to which it's necessary for government to incentivise these, as it's so often called. Incentivisation can be subsidies, stroke tax breaks, or whatever it might be. Or will the market create its own incentives?
Well, in terms of our net debt and gross debt, we are substantially below as a percentage of GDP what other comparable nations have incurred. So, for example, our net debt to GDP is less than half of what it is in the United Kingdom and the United States, and a fraction of what it is in Japan. The interest bill on our debt has been lower today than it was going into the pandemic at a higher interest rate. Now, of course, interest rates are not going to stay where they are forever, but our ability to service that debt and our ability to manage it overall, I think, is there. But we didn't have a choice with respect to putting the economic support into the economy when we faced this biggest economic shock since the Great Depression. The way we're going to pay down the debt in the future, Graham, is by growing the pie, by expanding the economy. And so in the most recent financial year, 2021, our deficit was $134 billion. When I announced the budget last October, we were expecting a deficit of over $212 billion. And so we saw an $80 billion improvement in the budget bottom line. Why? Because more people were in work paying taxes and less people were on welfare. Yes, commodity prices had been relatively high, and we'd seen extra support through the iron ore price in particular. But it was primarily driven by better labour market outcomes. So if we can build economic growth and productivity gains and higher employment, then we can start to see our overall debt burden come down. And the fact that our AAA credit rating has been maintained, we're one of only 9 countries in the world to have a AAA credit rating from the 3 leading credit rating agencies. That's quite a significant achievement. It's not one that we're complacent about, but it's one that we've managed to achieve. With respect to new technologies and incentives, I'll give you one example of where we are doing that more broadly. It's in the medical and the biotech space. Graham, I announced in the last budget something called a patent box, where if you are a medical or biotech company that does R&D in Australia, registers a patent, that commercializes it and derives income from that patent, then you will pay a concessional company tax rate of 17 cents in the dollar. Not 30 cents, 17 cents in the dollar. And that is the means by which we can incentivize new investment here in Australia. We're looking at doing that in clean energy and other areas as well. And I think that is one way of ensuring that we can align research and development tasks, commercialization of new technologies, and our tax system to create those better outcomes.
Let me just go to big tech, and I'm going to take you to another area which is also within your remit, and that is the position of Amazon, Google, Facebook, Twitter, and the like. In one sense, they've created their own competitive pressures, and they've put competitive pressures and disciplines on traditional businesses. But do they need regulation over and above those that apply to all businesses and the, of course, ever-present regulation of competition?
I think they do. I think they do need regulation that's targeted, that is obviously fit for purpose, and a body well, the ACCC, Graham, has done a lot of work in terms of the digital platforms that we help bring to fruition to ensure that those digital giants paid traditional news media businesses for generating content. So if you're the News Limited or your Channel 9 or your Channel 7, you're now getting paid by the Googles and the Facebooks for generating content that appears on their screens. That's a big development which hopefully will ensure the sustainability of public interest journalism in our country. That is a direct result of us standing up to those digital giants and a direct result of targeted regulation.
All right. Question about the impact of China and our failure to genuflect to the pressures that China imposed, including the 14 detailed demands that they had to restoring appropriate relationships. It has had an impact on trade, which has been significantly offset by the iron ore trade that we have, although that iron ore price is subject to some variations at the moment. But would you like to just comment upon the current position and what the prognosis is?
Well, I've made a speech about this recently. I mean, we are being subject to China's economic coercion, whether it's coal, whether it's barley, whether it's beef, whether it's wine. Our exports have been targeted. The good news is that our export industries have been incredibly flexible, nimble, and they've identified new markets. So, for example, 30 million tonnes of coal that was previously going to China, we've been able to find new markets for 28 million of those tonnes. Barley that was previously going to China is now going to Saudi Arabia. Wine that was previously going to China is now going to Singapore. So actually the impact on our overall trade profile has not been to this point that great. That being said, we obviously want to continue to trade with China. They're our biggest trading partner. It's worth $250 billion a year in two-way trade. And our economies, to some extent, are complementary. The resources that we send over there are absolutely critical to fuel their economic growth, like the iron ore and steel industry. Likewise, their exports to us, tourism, students, other manufactured goods are important to our economy. So we would like to see a respectful relationship, recognising that there will be differences, but we won't concede on the national interest, Graham. We will take decisions that are clear, that are consistent, and that are in the national interest. And that may be with respect to things like telecommunications, foreign investment, which is obviously my remit. That may be in respect to foreign interference. That may be respect to strategic matters, partnerships like the Quad that we've engaged in with Japan and India and the United States. So we won't make any apologies for that, but we will be clear and consistent in our dealings with China. I mean, I do want to point out that, China's economic success is, of course, extremely significant. They have taken hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. And if people get an opportunity to read one book on China, it's called On China by Henry Kissinger, because he points out in this book that for the last 2,000 years, the Chinese economy was actually the biggest economy in the world for 1,800 of them. It was only with the Industrial Revolution that they got overtaken by the West. So for China, they don't see themselves becoming the largest economy in the world for the first time. They see themselves very much just reascending to where they were. And I think that's really important to understand their mindset. The other thing is, China has changed, I think, in the last decade plus. Back in 2003, you may remember we had the President of China and the President of the United States address our Parliament in successive days in October 2003, George W. Bush, at the time, Hu Jintao. It was a remarkable thing, but you couldn't see that happening today. You couldn't see the US and Chinese presidents addressing our Parliament in successive days. There is a lot more strategic or geostrategic competition right now. And it's obviously a pretty complex world right now. And so I think people have to be realistic about where the global environment is. But as for Australia, whether it's our new AUKUS arrangement with the United Kingdom and the United States, whether it's the quadrilateral dialogue or whether it's the other measures that we're taking, we'll continue to defend and uphold the national interest.
All right, now I'm conscious of the fact that you've got to go in about 1 minute's time, so I'm going to put the last question to you as the hardest question of all, and that is that back in your earlier days, your youth, you were a great tennis player. I remember watching you with great wonderment at 97 Elmer Road, sweeping the courts, both actually and also with your tennis racket. If you had a choice today, in retrospect, of either winning Wimbledon or being treasurer, what would you choose?
Wimbledon. No choice. No choice. Like many young kids, I dreamt of, walking onto that court or holding up that trophy and making a full-time career of tennis. But I also realised that my ambitions were far greater than my talents, Graham. So I had to be realistic. I got to chase my dream. My parents said to me, because I didn't want to finish high school. I actually wanted to leave school and go and hit tennis balls for a living. And fortunately, my parents, encouraged me to finish year 12, which I did. And I had a little sticker on my door that said, "The pain of discipline is far easier than the pain of regret." And that drove me to put my head down, do my year 12. I finished year 12 and then I chased my dream. I played tennis full time. For the next year, I played tennis in Germany and Switzerland and Israel and a whole lot of different countries. I trained up at Ashley Cooper's Tennis Academy in Queensland. Played against a young Pat Rafter up there and did lots of things. And a highlight for me was representing Australia at 2 World University Games in tennis in 1991, I think it was, in Sheffield, England, and then 1993 in Buffalo in the United States. So I loved my tennis. I got to play it at university, Monash at Oxford, but I realised that I couldn't, make a career out of it. So I did the next best thing, and I went into politics, and here I am talking to you. So thank you.
Yeah, and you've won the Grand Slam of Treasurers, I would think. But so congratulations, Treasurer. Look, I'm going to close off very quickly, so I know you have an obligation.
That's okay.
I don't think I can say anything more than what I said in the introduction. You've got a AAA rating for conviction, for the courage of your convictions, and importantly, and this comes through so often when people talk about you, your ability to actually communicate in a way which reflects both your decency as a human being, but also your integrity. And that's so important in politics. And so I'd like to say on behalf of all of us who have logged in today, thank you so much indeed for your exposition about where the Australian economy has been, where it is going in the future. And I'm getting notices that are coming up here in the chat room. Wonderful speaker, great presentation. You ought to see them. We'll get them to you, but it's a great commendation on you personally. Thank you very much indeed. And could everyone, if they can come off mute somehow, just express their appreciation in the usual way.
Well, thank you, Graham, and thank you to all the Rotarians on the call. It's about service above self. That's what your creed is, and Rotarians live that every day. And I'm very proud to be associated with Rotary clubs in my electorate, and I'm very proud of what the Rotary organisation has done since 1905, when it was founded by Paul Harris. So thank you for all that you do and you continue to do, and I'm very happy to join this group anytime you wish, because it's been a good opportunity to talk about some of the more pressing issues out there. So thank you.
Josh, thank you very much for being with us this morning. We will have you back, so we won't miss out on that opportunity. But I'd be very much remiss in not acknowledging Tilak Dissanayake, who is in your electorate, who's actually helped organise this. So thank you so much, Tilak. Josh, we'll see you back here sometime soon. Thank you. Well, Graham Samuel, thank you very much for chairing that and asking the hard questions. I think that was very, very good from you to put those questions to our Treasurer. We've got a lot more questions in the chat room, so guests and Rotarians, keep putting the questions in, because the Treasurer has agreed to respond to all of the questions, and we will get them back to all of the attendees as soon as possible. So thank you. Now, we had to change up the agenda today because of the Treasurer's commitments. I think you heard he had a meeting, on-air meeting with Fran Kelly interview, and he's got to catch up with the PM shortly. So we did change up the agenda, and I'd like to now go back to the agenda, and let's start as we normally would with an acknowledgement to country from Marion McLeod. Thank you, Marion.
Thank you. On behalf of the meeting, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are located, who for tens of thousands of years sustained healthy communities and wisely managed the resources of these lands. I pay my respects to the elders, past and present, and welcome the participation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as we shape a future in which all thrive. Thank you, Philip.
Thanks, Marion. Andrew Coors, if you can please do the toast to Australia.
Thanks, Philip. It's my honour to present the toast to this wonderful place we call home, Australia. No matter the challenges we face, there is always so much to be grateful for across the vast expanses of this great land. And I think, Philip, you mentioned that we've got representatives from far and wide today on this meeting, which is a true credit to the development of Rotary. We've been able to reach so many people today. I would also like to take this opportunity to say, may we continue to respect and show understanding to our leaders as they navigate through these very difficult times that we face. So guests and Rotarians, if you'd raise your teacups, perhaps the people in New Zealand might have something slightly stronger, but join me as we raise a toast to Australia.
To Australia.
Right.
Thank you, Andrew. Paul Cross, would you like to present the toast to Rotary International, Paul?
Yeah, thank you, Philip, and to all Rotarians and friends. I'd be happy to propose a toast to this amazing organisation. Rotary has been serving the community in Australia and New Zealand now for over 100 years after initially commencing in North America after 116 years ago. This year, our endeavours of service above self continue with a new era of focus for our Rotary organisation in environment and sustainability. So I now ask you to toast our wonderful organisation, Rotary International.
Rotary International. Thank you so much, Paul. Lovely work from all of you. Friends and Rotarians, it's always interesting when you're the leader of a club to induct people. It is the best job in Rotary. Today, it's my pleasure to ask for two people to come forward in the Zoom room, Michaela Staffris and Andrew Chappell. Today, folks, we induct and welcome to our club, Michaela and Andrew. Members of the Rotary Southbank CEO Satellite Club have been appraised of their backgrounds and have been made aware that both Michaela and Andrew have strong leadership experience, along with impressive achievements in business and the not-for-profit sector that will allow them to make significant contributions to the community as Rotarians. Personally, I'm enjoying working with Michaela already on one of our club projects, and I find her to be quite amazing and very, very businesslike about going about it efficiently. And with Andrew, we've actually known him for many years. When he was the CEO of the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation, he worked in partnership with our district and Rotary across Victoria on so many wonderful projects. So it's a pleasure for me to now ask Michaela and Andrew to step forward again. I would like to thank you for accepting the invitation for this club to join the worldwide fellowship and service work of Rotary. This invitation was extended to you because we believe that your leadership qualities are aligned to those required in imparting the Rotary message to the community at large. The principles and practices of Rotary and the privileges and obligations of a Rotarian are now bestowed upon you. We look to you to uphold Rotary's four-way test and its motto of service above self, as Josh Frydenberg alluded to be your guiding principles as Rotarians. We also look to you to join with us as champions of equity, inclusion, and diversity as we serve our community. We hope that you will give this club the benefits of your leadership experience to further strengthen our goals in serving our community. We're all looking forward to your contribution and indeed inspiration in enabling us to serve society and influence outcomes in a meaningful and impactful way. I am proud to welcome you both and congratulate you on becoming members of the Southbank Rotary CEO Satellite Club. I ask all those online with us now to join me in extending a very warm welcome to our new members, Rotarians Michaela Staffris and Andrew Chappell. Welcome. Can we give them a round of applause, please? Thank you, Michaela, and thank you, Andy. Good to have you back in Rotary. Now, going back with the agenda, it's also one of the greatest pleasures of the past district governor to acknowledge clubs that have done well in a year. And one of these clubs is the Rotary Club of Melbourne, and in particular, past president Marion McLeod, who's now a member of the CEO Satellite Club. Marion and her board have been acknowledged by the Rotary International president for last year, Olga Knack, for outstanding service in being offered a citation for their great work during a very difficult COVID year. Marion, I know you're very proud of your club, your old club, and your board, and I just want to acknowledge your leadership style and skills that got you to achieve this citation. Congratulations, and I'm sure the Rotary Club of Melbourne will join the CEO Satellite Club in congratulating you and your last year's board wholeheartedly. So can we give them a round of applause, please? Well, we're getting back on track with our agenda, which is great, and we might even be finishing on time. So let me go back to the agenda. I wanted to just talk about a couple of programs that we're working on. I mentioned Michaela has already started work with Tricia and myself on and a few others on a new program. It's actually an old program that's been refurbished. It's a program that will help young people put together their first resume in looking for their first career opportunity. And we look to launch that on the Thursday, the 16th of December at our last meeting of the year, our Christmas function. So please do join us for that. And you'll get updates over the next 2 months about what this program is all about, and get to see and preview the new website, which is very, very exciting and inspirational. We hope that it'll help not only our Australian youth, but also the students that come in from overseas that reside in Melbourne. I know prior to the pandemic, there were 60,000 students in Melbourne, and I think we owe it to them for bringing in a lot of stability to our economy, but also to help them when they're here to actually participate in employment and help our economy along. I also wanted to say that we've had Josh Frydenberg today, and our next meeting on Thursday, the 18th of November, we're going to go to the other side of politics, and we've invited Gareth Evans, former Foreign Affairs Minister from the Labour Party, to come and talk about submarines, China, France, and the relationship with Britain and America. I'm sure that will be a very interesting meeting, and you're all welcome to come back. Now, this month is the month of economic and community development. So I think what a great time for us to be doing that in Australia as well, when we're coming out of COVID and businesses are opening up. I know there's a lot of challenges ahead, but together, we Rotarians can actually introduce opportunities to our business partners and the men and women in Australia. So let's put our heads together in helping economic and community development, not just in Australia, but across the world and in the poorest countries, particularly to our north. I know that you will all work towards that. And one more just to mention from me as the chair of the CEO Satellite Club. Folks, we really, I think, have an opportunity to attract Rotarians, not just to the CEO Club, but to all clubs in our district. So if you know any men and women in business who share the same values, same integrity, background, and would make good Rotarians, because not only will they put back, but they will get the opportunities to learn and grow and to have a passport to the world through the badge that we all wear as Rotarians. So please do think about who can join Rotary and invite them to our great organization because of the benefits that you get as Rotarians. I'm sure you'd like to extend that opportunity to your colleagues and friends and family. Are there any questions from the members or the audience? If you do have a question, please do put your hand up and let's see if we can find you. It's very difficult with the number of people on Zoom, and I noticed that the numbers have dropped after Josh Frydenberg left, which is totally understandable. Aviv, I can see you put your hand up.
Yes, good morning. Just a quick question. We very much enjoyed this meeting, very professional, extremely well done, and maybe that's just something that the CEO's Club takes for granted as what you do. Having attended other meetings, not all other meetings are like this. So my question is, do you have a schedule that you could circulate that other non-CEO Club members may be able to join some of your meetings and possibly take more interest in your club?
Absolutely. The more the merrier, and the more we share opportunities, the better off we'll all be. The CEO Satellite Club has three promises that we make. One is that we will use our careers and our work experience to benefit our community here and overseas and bring our contacts to play and help each other out. The second is to influence the principles of social investment to other businesses. And the third is to actually work with governments, all sides of politics, to make things happen. So I'm really pleased that you asked that question, and we'd love to share that with you. I don't believe we're being political by inviting politicians to come along. I think we are influencing them through our association with them. And as an example, this has allowed our Rotary Club of Carlton to bring out a gentleman that they got to know in 2011-12. I think you've heard me tell the story, some of you, that Noor Shah went back to Afghanistan, ended up running the health system there. So the Taliban took a set against him, and he was desperate to come out of there. And the Rotary Club of Carlton and past District Governor Keith Ryle did a great job in getting our connections together to get him safe passage out. And the good news is that Noor Shah is now with his 7 kids under 13 and wife in Brisbane, settling into their new country. And I'm sure if we come back and see them in 50 years, they would have made a great contribution to Australia and to the world. So Aviv, thank you for asking that question. And of course, you'd be most welcome to come back. Thank you. All right, it's now just about 8:30. Please keep the questions coming, and stay after 8:30 if you want to. Just socialize. We'll open up the Zoom room for chat. The questions to Treasurer Josh Frydenberg will be answered by him directly, and his Chief of Staff have committed to getting that back to us, and we will get it out to all of you. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I know you've got a work day ahead like I have, but if you have a few minutes to stay and talk, that'll be great. Marion McLeod and the Rotary Club of Melbourne members, congratulations on the citation from the RI President. Graham Samuel, wonderful job chairing our guest speakers presentation. Team from CEO Southbank, thanks for being here and supporting us. Great work, and thank you for bringing in your business friends too. See you soon.